Good evening and welcome. I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order and welcome you to a joint meeting of the Post Falls School District and Coeur d'Alene School District's Board of Trustees here on March 19th, 2018. Before we get going, why don't we go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. So if the gentlemen would please remove their hats and everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so this is kind of a unique opportunity, I guess, here where we have the two boards together, and I'd just like to thank the Post Falls folks for coming over here and joining us in Coeur d'Alene. Before we get going, I'd just like to introduce all the participants, and I will start at my right here. So first is Mr. Dave Paul. He's the chair of the Post Falls School District. And then Mrs. Michelle Lippert. And then Miss Carol Goodman and Miss Bridget Eastman. To my immediate left is Mr. Tom Hearn, vice chair, Miss Lisa May, Miss Tambra Pickford, and Mr. Dave Eubanks. My name is Casey Morser, and I'm the chair of the Coeur d'Alene School Board. If you would like to make comments today after the presentation from the superintendents, please sign in on the sheet provided at the back. We'll just ask that your comments be limited to 3 minutes, please. Dave, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I don't think so. Just thanks everybody for coming. We're anxious, obviously, to get your feedback. So look forward to that. So thank you.
Okay, well, I'm assuming everyone who's here knows why we're here. So for the past few months, the superintendents have just been talking about realigning the boundaries between Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene School District and seeing if they can make something that makes sense. And they're going to give us a little presentation on that, and I think let us know how we got to where we're at today. So, gentlemen, if you will, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you folks.
Thanks very much. It is too loud. Good evening again. My name is Stan Olson. I'm the interim superintendent of the Coeur d'Alene School District. And I, again, thank our collective boards of trustees, as well as our staff and audience members for being with us tonight. Purpose of tonight's meeting is pretty simple, and Chairman Morrisroe said it pretty well. It's a chance for us to talk with you a little bit about a concept relative to boundary reorganization between the Post Falls School District and the Coeur d'Alene School District. And I'll immediately switch channels to the next item on the agenda is, how in the heck did we get here tonight? How did this all start? Well, the reality was that it started at a hearing with the State Department of Education. As many of you know, there have been discussions between and among the Post Falls School District, the Lakeland School District, and the Coeur d'Alene School District relative to boundaries over the last several years. And sometimes those discussions have manifested into appeals for boundary changes or student location or student relocation relative to where families resided. We had this discussion, the collective we, Lakeland, Post Falls, and Coeur d'Alene, at a hearing at Atlas Elementary School in September, where a state hearing officer was in attendance to hear the appeals of neighborhood residents who were looking at relocating their area of residence, their home, if you will, from one school district into another school district. Interestingly, the conversation basically centered on the fact that these folks thought that all three districts were very, very solid programs, very substantial programs, and could meet the needs of their children. A couple of the folks that spoke talked about the fact that they had assumed when they were fixing their final location for their home, that the home was located in a particular district, and to the surprise of their family, once they were in the house, it was not. This was not about school quality, it was not, or system quality, it was not about fairness, it was about an expectation that seemed to make sense based on where one would assume boundaries were supposed to be. That didn't work. All of you know full well that the boundaries between our districts were let at a time when, as they say back home, there weren't no people out there, okay? That boundaries were pretty much snapped across an area decades and decades and decades ago, and as we all know full well, things have changed. Development has taken place in sections of the Post Falls community, the Lakeland community, and the Coeur d'Alene community that has kind of put those boundaries into play and put those boundaries into discussion. Over the last 5 years, we've had about 7 different appeals go through boards of trustees between and among the 3 districts and go to the State Board of Education for review. When we got a chance to get together in September, and Jerry and I were friends and colleagues, I was a former superintendent in southwest Idaho, where we got to meet each other. I'm told you're not supposed to say Boise here. So we were friends and colleagues from those days, so it was a relatively easy discussion for us, and we had met our colleague Becky Meyer, and we began to talk, and the conversation basically was that there might be a better way to do this. Rather than constantly go before a hearing officer and constantly go before the State Board of Education, maybe we should sit down as districts, starting with Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls, and take a look if there was a possibility for a smarter way to lay boundaries. So we came together with our board chairs, Dave and Casey, and Jerry and I, and started, as they say back home again, spitballing this idea, taking a look at what boundaries made more sense. And we took from the testimony we heard not only at the hearings that were held in September, but previous hearings about what people really thought was the boundary between the districts. And guess what? The boundary came out as Hutter Road, time and time and time again. So our conversation centered on what looks to be a natural boundary, an appropriate boundary, and we began to speculate as to how that boundary would look as it followed across the district. So at this particular stage, we stopped with a concept and said we need to bring our collective boards together to talk about this, but as importantly, to hear from the people who are affected by it. To invite those residents who are in the area of impact, whether they be in the Post Falls district or the Coeur d'Alene school district, invite developers if they would be so inclined to participate in the discussion, and sit down, propose a concept, and again, this is a concept, and get some feedback from those who are affected by it so that our trustees could hear that feedback and continue the conversation from this particular point. And that's where we are. So what we'd like to do tonight is take a bit of time, show you the general concept, and we certainly can entertain questions while that's being displayed. And then when done, we'll turn it back over to our respective chairs to solicit feedback from the audience and from board members. Did I miss anything? Jerry, did I miss anything? Okay, buddy. You're on. Thank you.
Southwest Idaho, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I'm Jerry Kane. I'm the superintendent of Post Falls School District, and I want to thank all 9 board members that we have up here for willing to talk about this. We had these conversations, as Stan said, and we kind of got high-centered a little bit. Okay, what's going to move us one way or the other? And I'm speaking mostly from the Post Falls perspective. And so this has seemed like a natural place to go getting people's feedback, is what kind of hardship it may cause them or not, and what kind of support there is or is not. And that may drive a decision, at least for the Post Falls School District side of things, and as well as Coeur d'Alene. One thing that I'll add to Stan's comments, one of the complicating factors related to all this boundary stuff is areas of city impact. And I don't know, I don't want to get into the weeds too far, but you know, it really makes it messy out there in that particular area, because the Landing, for example, which is you know, a large housing development, is located all in the city of Coeur d'Alene, but some of it, a fourth of it, or close to that, is in the Post Falls School District. So it's kind of a natural, you know, your brain's not quite grasping, okay, well, why is that? And I can understand that from a perspective of a homeowner in that particular area. Anyway, my job is to talk about a couple things. Number one would be the proposal itself, but before I do that, I think one of the biggest issues that most folks would have related to this, with the exception of parents, would be what's the tax implications. So if I could get the slide with the tax information on there. This is the current last 3 years of tax rates. This to kind of demonstrate what may happen if you know, we did this exchange, and there's going to be some folks that are moving into the Post Falls School District, some going into the Coeur d'Alene School District. What would happen to their taxes? Well, what I would like to point out, you can see the Coeur d'Alene taxes, they're super stable at 230 something, and that's my understanding by design, and probably will stay that way. If you look at Post Falls, you can see that our tax rate has been going down over the last 3 years, and there's all indications that it will continue to do so, not only because of some growth in the district, but we have some urban renewal districts that will be going off the books. And so we anticipate, I guess, and this is projections, that by next year, fiscal year, there will virtually be no difference between this and our rate at that time. And you know, there's a lot of variables in there, so I don't want to just say it's going to be perfect, but I would be surprised. You can see it's 19 cents a year for the last couple of years, so I'm assuming something like that's going to happen again. We don't have any major tax proposals on the docket for this fiscal year, so I guess I think I'm pretty safe in saying that it shouldn't be much of a difference for anybody in the area of school taxes. Now, of course, there's other taxes to be talked about as well. But anyway, I thought that we'd put that up there, this for you know, folks to know what they can quasi-expect. The other kind of key piece that I think is critical is that in our preliminary discussions, Stan and I, Dave and Casey, we said, well, if we end up doing this, which is a big if at this stage, we need to think about the families. And in all cases, we said we need to grandfather any parents and students that want to remain in what was their home district. And that's still, you know, we want to do that under any circumstances. We want stability for kids. And so we agreed that if this moves forward, that would be a provision. I think it's in the letter as well, I hope, that it was pretty clear there that we definitely don't want to disrupt kids' educations with this discussion. I guess with that, I'd ask for the first slide on the map. And, you know, again, I think there's a map in your packet, but the bottom line is we spent some time talking about what makes some sense. Hutter Road, of course, is the only north-south, I guess, major road in that particular area. There's a road called Carrington in the Landing subdivision that kind of is close to our boundary, but when the boundary was set, there really was nothing out there. It was just a section of land. And so there was a reason in 1948 they did that, but we don't know what it was. But the bottom line is the proposal is, let's make Hutter Road up to, you can see all the way up to Harvest Avenue, the boundary, and that would mean that this particular area, which is within the confines of the Landing Housing Subdivision, would move into the Coeur d'Alene School District. This area down here would move into the Post Falls School District area. And you know, you can, and also there's a piece of land north of Prairie Avenue you can see up there that's involved in the conversation at this time. We did make a conscious decision though, because some of the issues that have driven this is this whole idea that a subdivision is kind of in two different districts. So down here is Mill River, down in this area, and we made a conscious decision to say, okay, if you're in the Mill River subdivision, even though it's geographically on the west side of Hutter Road, even though Hutter Road doesn't really go through there, but you know, if you this as the crow flies, we said, okay, we're going to not mess with that as far as moving it from one school district to the other. And I think we have a map that might even show it. Look at that, beautiful. So you can kind of see, here's a line that's that we were proposing. Here's the Mill River. That's the extreme west side of the Mill River development. So anyway, other than that, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and certainly if any of you are unsure about your status in this proposal, and again, I want to emphasize this is a proposal, and please let us know and we'll clarify where you would be at in regards to this proposal. Maybe go back a slide or two. There you go. And again, this is a little better view of some of the areas that are being considered for change. So anyway, with that, I think I don't believe I have anything more to say unless there's questions about the proposal from either of the board at this time. And if not, yes.
Yeah, I have
Dave.
one, Jerry. How do the proposed boundaries, the proposed boundary, how does that compare to the city boundaries?
Well,
Coeur
the
d'Alene and
area of
Coastal.
city impact, the whole area of that's being considered to go into the Coeur d'Alene School District is in the city of Coeur d'Alene already. It's already been annexed. And so it would, you know, that's kind of the natural reason why I think there's some gravity to pull it that way. And I'll just share that, you know, from the Post Falls perspective, when the West Landings excision, from our perspective, excision, from the Coeur d'Alene perspective, it's an annexation, took place, we felt like that was extremely disruptive because technically it raised our school district patrons' taxes when those folks left. Not a huge amount, but it's called, you know, that's not good business. How can a small group of people determine somebody else's taxes? So that's a whole nother conversation that you know, we've had, but in our opinion, at least my opinion, it was disruptive, and that's one of the reasons I felt like I'd recommend that we get engaged in these conversations. This didn't seem like good business to me, this kind of Wild West boundary world that we were kind of living in at that time. And so anyway, that's a little more history in regards to that. Other questions, or I'll shut up and let the people that came here to talk.
So is there any effect on basically assessed value? I mean, I think it needs to be even when this all breaks down. That's
certainly been a goal all from the get-go. Was we talk about quid pro quo, right. And you know, it's very difficult to make the apples into oranges. You know, or oranges to apples, you know, because you're talking about potential future value and current value, and you know, so those are the kind of things we've been discussing, the impact of that. But one of the things that I know I've had the conversation with our board about is, okay, here's some value, the potential value, but what goes with that value could be a bunch of students, and that's a great thing. And you know, we're going to educate every beautiful child that happens to reside in our school district. But you know, there's some obligation with that value that, you know, it kind of talk about quid pro quo. It kind of like there's you're going to have to build a school, and maybe more if, you know, the landing development completely builds out to what is being planned, we're guesstimating it's more than one elementary school, and it's probably, and the impact on the secondary is, as large. So anyway, that's kind of the conversation that we've been having, at least, and
I had the same question. Do you know the potential number of students that would change that we would gain in our district?
say that
Potential
again.
number of new students to the Coeur d'Alene district.
How many
students
are currently in this area, residing in this area that would be?
in the trails?
I'd say.
Yeah, because that's
total,
the,
do we know?
Yeah, total.
Do you have any idea on that?
not on the part down by the river, we don't. What we have is, we know kind of what's in the trails because of those students. We have students coming to the Post Falls School District. We run a bus through there, right path through the West Landing, down Carrington, down to pick those kids up. But I know some of them, I don't know, I can't say if any of them are in Coeur d'Alene anymore, because that used to be the case with West Landing. They were open and enrolled in the Coeur d'Alene School District. Many of those West Landing students were, but I don't know if that, I think you're not open to open enrollments now. So my understanding is we have about 14, 15 kids that reside there right now. In the trails.
Trails is the only inhabited area. I mean, any other boundary is mostly fields, right?
On the east side of Hutter, you're talking, or are you talking the west side as well? There.
When we change the boundary, isn't the trails the only?
In that particular area, yes. On the east side, that is, from my understanding, that's the only populated area right now, and it's developing out, and it's continuing to grow, and there's housing starts there, and et cetera. There are students that I know go to the Coeur d'Alene School District down by the river, but what's interesting, and we've talked about this as well, many of those families open enrolled into the Post Falls School District as well. So it's, that whole area down by the river, it has always been kind of a, I don't want to, I'll have to come up with a better term than no man's land, but that it doesn't seem like folks were necessarily, they're looking for what is their natural place of schooling, and I think many of the students in that area chose to come to Post Falls as well, and that's just because of whatever their circumstances are. It made it, they felt like Post Falls was a better solution, but also in the other way as well, and we have that happening at the trails, or we had that happening at West Landing previously, where students, parents opted into the Coeur d'Alene School District. So anyway, everybody's circumstances, daycare is a big factor. There's a lot of variables that go into how a family decides where they think their students should be educated.
I think we can check on the number, but I thought at one point I had heard that in our boundary, the part that's south of Interstate 90, that would change from Coeur d'Alene to Post Falls. We had about a dozen students there. Jay, does that sound about right?
If you give me 30 seconds.
I think that's what I heard at one time. Trustee May had a question just about the valuations, and I'll just address it. I looked it up real quick, and we can get this sent out, but Eric Herringer from Piper Jaffray that does bond counsel work for both districts, ran some numbers based on last year's tax rate or tax value, and it would be about a $40 million deduction, I guess, in property values loss of the Coeur d'Alene School District, and a $40 million gain in the Coeur d'Alene School District.
Post Falls, you mean?
Or excuse me, in Post Falls, thank you.
But that's not including the trails value. There's $52 million of value south of Celtice prior to us pulling the Mill River folks out, so that made it to 40. And then whatever, so it'd be 40 minus whatever the trails is, and that's a moving target. I would guess somewhere, we had an estimate at 12, but I think it's more like 15.
Okay.
But yeah.
You're right, thank you.
Yeah, it would be a positive immediate impact to the Post Falls School District and a little bit of an impact to the Coeur d'Alene School District on the negative side, on the immediate front, yes.
Casey, the current snapshot is actually only 14.
14 students currently in that area. Okay, thank you, Jay.
Jerry mentioned in the early stages of the presentation, those students have the choice to stay where they are or to make the move depending on where the boundaries, if they are to be changed, fall. So when they're grand person in to graduate, I was going to say into perpetuity, but let's hope they graduate. So should we turn it back over to the Board of Trustees to conduct feedback?
Yeah.
Great.
Board members, is there any more questions first, or do we want to go ahead and we'll get into hearing from the folks in the audience, and then we'll, after that, we can ask any questions we have after that.
I'll have questions after public comment, I think.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go by the list here. If you signed up and you've changed your mind, that's fine. Just say you chose not to speak. So first up is John and Aaron Swallow. Okay. All right, Stephen and Katie Chaffin? Caffin? Oh, sorry. I should have said this previously. If you could, if you're going to stand up for comment, just head over to the podium. We'll get the mic on there. This is being recorded, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 children that are already in the Coeur d'Alene School District, and we are just bettering our family, moving into the trails with an expectation of common sense boundary. We thought that would be Coeur d'Alene School District. So I appreciate this coming back to the table as it was declined in December by the state board. I'm not sure if is it in the law the best interest of the children if that was taken in effect with all these children being in the same neighborhood, but no, you across the street have to go to Post Falls, you have to go to Coeur d'Alene. That isn't common sense. So I appreciate the positivity and allowing us to talk about it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Nystrom. Good evening, sir.
I'm Gary Nystrom. I live at 7094 West Big Sky Drive, right near the landings. I've had some long conversations with Dave Paul and Mr. Jerry Keene. For the most part, I'm for this, but what I have not been supportive is the tax cuts that we take, the revenue losses from property value that we take. And you just mentioned, somebody just mentioned 40 million, but we're not talking about the landings. If you build a total out, and I just take a conservative number that the builder has, you're at 200 million by the time they get those 475 houses in there pretty soon. So that's something I look at, because then we lose that value. It pushes taxes back onto us. And I know some people in here keep discussing common sense boundary. I went to the trails and talked to them about, pretend like I was a buyer and asked them what the school district ought to be. They've been really open. You're in the Post Falls School District, but we're trying to move you over. It's the buyer's responsibility to know where they're into. That's their job, to know what school districts they're into. And that's one of the reasons I fought this move in last year for this. But Jerry will tell you, I'm kind of on board with this, but I'm the one that says that kids need to be in their school district if they want to stay here. I've supported much of this that's gone on. I just worry about us sucking up losses in property values, and that's where I stand on it. And I also want to see a vote of the people on this, okay?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Given that information at the beginning, or was it till they kept coming to us to be annexed and then?
That I don't know. Ms. Pickford was asking if, Mr. Nystrom, do you know, has that always been the case with what I guess the trails disclosure on that? I think we've heard some reports on our side of maybe initial buyers were told that they were in the Coeur d'Alene School District. Or,
Times, I reported Jerry Keene every time.
okay.
Even the number of houses that are still in your district that belong to us for tax supplies. Yes, every time I've gone through there, and for the people that don't know this, the landings had signs on one side and the other side, which school district you're on. Everybody that says, oh, I wasn't told, they just didn't do their research, because the county tax records will show you what district you belong to. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, next up is Shelley Hansen. No. Shelley's just present. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Tori Myers.
Hello. So I currently live in the Trails. I live at 7062 Rendezvous, and the boundary line actually goes, I have a 4-year-old, and the boundary line, so he's not in school yet, goes right through my property. So half of my property is in Coeur d'Alene, and the other half of my property is in Post Falls. And so for me, I just feel like, okay, so my neighbor right next door to me gets to go, because their boundary line is like this much more in Coeur d'Alene than mine is. So their child next door gets to go to Coeur d'Alene, but then my child goes to Post Falls. So I just don't think that that makes very much sense at all. Not to mention, like, we're thinking, okay, so if we sign up our son in Little League, like if you look at the Little League boundary map for Little League, we're in the Coeur d'Alene Little League. So not only are we going to be in the Coeur d'Alene Little League, but then now our child goes to Post Falls because we're, 2 feet of the boundary line is different. It just doesn't make sense to me. Then there's the park aspect of it. We're going to have this community park, and we're walking our dogs, and all of our friends and everything are on Carrington right there. Well, I just think that it would make sense for my son to be able to go outside and play with all of his friends that he can grow up with and go to school with all of those friends. Like, it just makes sense to me. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Scott in the booth, Scott Maven, could you on the map maybe pull up the Google map I believe you said you had, and just kind of zoom in on that area of the trails there by the red line, and then we can maybe look at that and discuss that. While they're working on that, I think we'll just keep going through the list here. So next up is Keith Wells.
Good evening. My name is Keith Wells. I actually do the sales for the Trail subdivision. So my role here tonight is not necessarily as an impacted parent, but just to get feedback, much the same as yourself. So I do want to say thank you to both boards for, much as Katie said, for looking at this issue. Because from a purely sales standpoint, when we talk about, as Tori mentioned, there are 7 houses, I believe, 7, 8, if we count the one south of John's Hawk there, but that are in 271. So from a simplicity standpoint, just to be able to tell somebody, you're in this one, you're in that one, that's really, from my perspective, what we'd be looking for. So again, would like to see it just from a common sense perspective, as has been brought up a couple of times. That's really what I would like to see. But again, thank you for addressing it and taking it into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Keith. All right, next up is Robert and Teresa Farr.
I'm Robert Farr. I'm not I don't reside in this area that's impacted, but I do own some property north of Prairie Avenue. And thanks to some of the members that are here, that property north of Prairie, yet east of Hutter, was annexed into the city of Hayden a couple of years ago. So presently, to me, it doesn't make sense that that corner of the city of Hayden would go to the Post Falls School District as opposed to the Coeur d'Alene School District. So I think that you've made a great effort on trying to reach a common ground in resolving this problem, and I applaud your efforts. Thank you.
Okay. Alan, did you want to speak? Alan Dykes.
So my name's Alan Dykes. I am Chief Operating Officer for Architera Homes, and I don't know, from a format standpoint, if people want to ask me questions, by all means. We're here, Architera, because we as a builder are trying not to fall into that rut of being somebody that just builds homes. We're trying to create communities. One of the things that in the trails is a challenge, as we've already heard, is that we're split. It's a small sector, but we're split right now within our current phase. And as we look at this community as we build it out, we're going to be in the city of Coeur d'Alene, and we're going to be getting bussed over to the city of Post Falls, or to the Post Falls School District, and that to me doesn't make sense. I've got no issues with Post Falls School District. I love Post Falls School District. We have given land to Post Falls in our reserve community. We'll be giving land to Post Falls in our Foxdale community. We are very much a fan. The difference is those are in the city of Post Falls, and to me that makes sense. It really does. As we look at this subdivision, we throw that number out. 470 homes is what we currently project. Things can change, meaning we don't know what the market might bear in 5 years, 10 years. What I do know based on current sales velocity, we're looking at 30 sales or so a year. So 30 sales, we've got 400 to go. If you do the math, that's 13 years to build it out. Right now with my current community, we don't have that many kids. We're very much a mix of, we have the families that are moving into our communities, and we also attract those buyers that are downsizing, that are empty nesters. So if I look in our community right now, we've been on pace right around 20% of our homes. So if you do the math and you figure 20% of the homes over each year, and you're looking at 30 sales, and you figure two per house, you're looking right around 12 kids being introduced in K through 12 each year. And again, I'm doing very rough numbers here. There's others that have greater analytics than us. To me, Hutter is the common sense boundary, and I cannot stress enough, this is not about a developer trying to make more money. It's not. We will live with whatever decision is rendered. We never have approached any home buyer, and I would challenge anyone to say differently from Architera's standpoint, where we have said you're in the Coeur d'Alene district, or we guarantee you will be in the Coeur d'Alene district. We will not go that route, not only from a lawsuit standpoint, but it's dishonest. That is not how we approach our business. So we have been very forthright in, you're in the city of Coeur d'Alene, you attend Post Falls School District. We are currently in the process, but at the end of the day, the process is the process, and we'll respect the decisions. My last note, and again, I want to emphasize this enough. We're trying to create communities. We want cohesiveness within the community. We want the kids within the community feeling that sense of pride. I know the boundary line always is going to have to reside somewhere, and I know that there's always going to be one kid on one side, one kid on the other, but we have the Trails community, and we're trying to do something special there. And to me, it does make sense to have the boundary on Hutter. I think that is common sense. So, any questions? All right. Thank you.
So they pulled up a map here, which looks like that's a little more updated than the ones we had on our sheets there. So it's kind of hard to tell because that doesn't have the boundary line on it. But if you see the field to the south or at the bottom of the screen, the green line or the line where it breaks from the field to the Coeur d'Alene Industrial Park, that line, if you can imagine, would just continue north. So you see in the Trail subdivision where they've they have a cul-de-sac there, and they have some curved roads. That's where a lot of the heartburn's been currently. If you look at the street with the cul-de-sac there, I believe it's the 5 end homes. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to, sorry, put my back to the audience here just so I can address the board. So this is where the current boundary is, and it would extend north up to the landing subdivision. So it goes right through here. This is a cul-de-sac. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture as close as I am, but these 5 houses at the end of the cul-de-sac are in the Post Falls School District. Everything on that side of the street's in Coeur d'Alene. As you go here, this rendezvous is a curved street, so you have this line starts cutting through this row of houses here. So some could be neighbors that are, one's in Coeur d'Alene, one's in Post Falls, or people on opposite sides of the street. You have that. So it makes it a little challenging. You know, you have a cul-de-sac here that both school districts are sending a school bus down. You have this road, both school districts are sending a school bus down because we both have kids on that street.
Where's the nearest school?
For Coeur d'Alene, yeah. Yeah, so it's actually on this street here, Hanley. Atlas Road is about here, so it's just on the other side of Atlas.
And where is the nearest school in Post Falls?
Well, actually, it would be Prairie View, but the kids they're going to Queensberry.
How many miles?
6.
6 or 7 miles.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
there is. I thought there was more than that. So, yeah.
With any luck, we'll have a school at Foxdale here not too long. First one on the east side of 41.
You have a question there? Okay, so what was your name, and I'll add you. Trina?
Trina.
And what was the last name, Trina?
Rainy.
Rainy, okay. Okay. Next up is Stephanie Meeks.
So I live in the Trails neighborhood as well, and I would agree with everything Alan has said. We've known that it was the Post Falls School District. But what doesn't make sense was that these boundaries were done 80 years ago. I mean, I've only lived here 11 years. My husband has lived here his whole life. Everything has just changed drastically, even in the 10 years I've lived here. So, like we've all been saying, the common boundary, that's what makes sense. We work in Coeur d'Alene. We pay taxes in Coeur d'Alene. We have 3 schools within 5 miles from us, elementary, middle, high school. There's a really small amount of families, I would say, in our neighborhood. Most people are downsizing. My immediate neighbors don't have children. I have 2. One is special needs and will need a para-pro with her until she's a senior in high school. Post Falls has not reached out to us, and we've been told that, at the age of 3, we're supposed to have our transition meeting out of infant toddler. Post Falls has never reached out to us. Coeur d'Alene has been all over it. We are everybody that we've met and is working with our daughter is through the city of Coeur d'Alene, and in the Coeur d'Alene, we're on the Coeur d'Alene team, whatever that means to anybody, but we would like our children to go to the Coeur d'Alene School District, because like we said, we do work in Coeur d'Alene. My husband is actually a teacher for the Coeur d'Alene School District. And we drive by for us, my daughter's blind. She's never going to be able to drive herself to school. Yes, the bus is an option, but if we need to pick her up and take her to appointments, going to Post Falls and coming back, it just is an inconvenience for us. Granted, we are one family, but for us, we would be for this new proposal. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. Nicholas Meeks? Okay, thank you for being here. All right, Cammie Shaw.
My name is Cammie Shaw. My husband and I and our 3 boys will be moving into our new home in the Trails next month. Our 2 oldest boys are currently in 1st and 3rd grade at Fernan, and we are strongly in support of the boundary change. Aside from benefiting from the excellent standards of the Coeur d'Alene School District, emotionally, it's better for our children to be going to the Coeur d'Alene School District. My husband's not here tonight because tonight is the last game for our 1st graders Parks and Rec basketball team. So if a change was not made, how they divide teams in Parks and Recs is you're with your teammates from your school in your grade. If the change wasn't made, our children would be put on random teams every single sports season, every single year. Whoever needed an extra player, our kids would just be tossed on their team instead of being with kids from their own class, their own school, their own neighborhood. So that would impact our children because, they want to play with their friends because we would be in the city of Coeur d'Alene. So they would also be going to a different school than the kids who possibly live across the street. They would be facing a very long bus ride away from home, 6 miles. It'll be 6 miles to school as opposed to just under 1.5 miles, which my kids would love to bike to school, which wouldn't be an option if we stayed in the Post Falls School District. They wouldn't be in the class with any of the kids that they have, that they have in their neighborhoods. It would just be a very foreign place for them to go from living in Coeur d'Alene and going to a school in Post Falls. I was lucky enough to graduate from the Coeur d'Alene School District. Almost my entire kindergarten class at Sorensen Elementary graduated together at Lake City High School. And I want that kind of experience for my kids. I don't want to be in no man's land, in limbo, because this is not going to solve itself. There's going to be more houses, there's going to be more growth, and this issue is going to come up again. This isn't going to go away. So I want to be able to assure my kids, okay, you can make friends with these kids in your elementary school because you will continue to go to school with them. Not well, maybe in a couple years we might, have to make another change. And I don't want that for them. I want them to be able to stay with their same people and make friendships that they can count on and not be nervous that this is going to become an issue again in a few years. So I feel like in the end, this comes down to, as a school district, we need to do what's best for the kids who live in that area, regardless of tax revenue or, things like that. We need to do what's best. There's 3, an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school within 2 miles of our house. And for us to send our kids 6 miles, possibly 15 miles to the high school just doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense for what would be best for our kids. So I think that's what we really need to be thinking about is what's best for these kids who live in that area. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cammie. Next up is Stephen and Andrea Spear.
I'd like to thank both boards for being here and for holding this meeting and hearing the public. It's most appreciated. We live in the Trails, 6691 North Rendezvous Drive, and we've purchased a home from Architera. Very happy with it. Our road does split between Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls. Both seem like lovely school districts, and we're quite happy with them. I think the boundary is a good common sense boundary. We're returning to Coeur d'Alene after a hiatus of 40 years. And I can tell you before, you probably didn't have enough time to spit before you were through Coeur d'Alene 40 years ago. So what is it going to be in the next 40 years? I think we really need to look forward to that as well. And that boundary just makes good sense. Before we moved out here, we had this on our radar, and NPR was talking about the fastest growing areas in the United States. And the Coeur d'Alene Post Falls area, in fact, we almost considered moving to Post Falls, is the fastest moving area. So as we look at these fields here, probably some of the folks that have been here for years and years aren't going to be happy with it, but that's going to fill in with housing. I mean, that's just a given. I think it's a common sense boundary, what you have proposed. I like the idea of the continuity with the Coeur d'Alene. We go to the city council meetings on a fairly regular basis, and I do like that continuity. My wife is an educator by training, and for us, first and foremost, what's best for the kids is what we will support, what you decide upon. Again, I would like to applaud those that have spoken. I definitely understand the implications of the tax burden. From our standpoint, we had no idea what the tax would be. We complain a lot about taxes in our family, but school taxes are not one of them. I think that's a good investment. I think it will even out over time. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, sir. And Trina Rainy.
So my name is Trina Rainy. I have 2 children, and I choice my kids into Post Falls. I'm currently located in the Coeur d'Alene School District, and when we moved into our house, you know, I assumed that they were going to go to the nearest school to us, which I don't know their names right off the bat, but they're about 3 miles maybe from us. So when I went to register them, they informed me that in fact my kids should go, you know, all the way into Coeur d'Alene. I have a daughter in junior high and a daughter in grade school. So I was calling around to get them into school. My daughter technically should go to school off the 15th Street exit in Coeur d'Alene, the junior high over there. And so I found out that her bus ride in the morning to school was 1.5 hours every morning. They would bus her up to the school that's closest to us. She would get off a bus there, get onto another bus, and transfer to the Coeur d'Alene School District each day and morning. I just moved here from Spokane. My family's in Spokane. I work in Spokane. My mom is in Post Falls. So if I have to have any sort of help getting my kids, you know, that's really out of the way for them to go get them. So we opted to choice into Post Falls, which has been great. But our problem is we have no bus stop for the Post Falls School District, so we have to take them to the closest bus stop, which is fine, not a big deal problem. But one instance, I couldn't answer the phone while I was at work, and my boyfriend, who gets my kids from the bus stop every day when I'm working, was at home chatting with a friend. Well, time, you know, got away from him, didn't realize that it was time to pick her up from the bus stop. Well, they took her to the school, or back to the bus barn, and by the time we figured out how to get her, whatever, they said they were in like 5 minutes from calling and taking her to the police department as an abandoned child because nobody was there to get her. But if the bus stop would have been across the road, which is Celtice, she could have walked right up the hill. Right there is our home, you know. So it would just be nice to be able to have a bus stop on this side of the road versus that side of the road, you know. So, I mean, granted, yes, it was our fault for not being there, but, you know, just that simple dropping off at the end of the road and our home is there. So for us, it is by far better to have the split into Post Falls and Coeur d'Alene. Thank you.
So, Ms. Rainey, just real quick, so are you in the area south of Interstate 90?
My address is 249 North Sealy. So I am about a block off of Sealy and Main. There's like, I think 3 other kids in there, and they all go into the Coeur d'Alene School District, but we chose to go to Post Falls.
So she is in the area of impact, if
Yes.
you will. Okay. Okay. Is there anyone who wanted to speak that was not signed up, that would like to sign up? Okay. All right, then we'll go ahead and close public comment. Board members, any questions, comments?
I have one question. There, one of the speakers, Mr. Nystrom, talked about a public vote. Is there a law that requires that, or how's this? I'd like to get some clarification of that.
I'll start, and then Jerry can. Yeah, he can correct me. Very well said. There are actually 2 Idaho statutes that govern the process of boundary change. And they were brought to our attention via the annexation hearings. One has to do with a simple process that basically says that boards have interface with the affected parties. They take action and they petition the State Board of Education for the process. So the process is basically streamlined given the prospect that there is general consensus that this is an appropriate move and one that's beneficial to the communities and districts. Jerry, you want to talk about the other one?
Sure.
All right. You get the other half here, buddy.
Well, the other, that was 307, 33307 is the one where you just petition straight to the state board. Of course, you have to have cause and you have to, present your case why you want to make the change. But there's 33308, which is the one we've been talking about with the West Landing excision or annexation that requires a submission to the State Department of Education. And both boards weigh in one way or the other. And the state board then forwards it to the state board for consideration on whether they're going to allow an election. And it would only be the voters affected by the decision. So, for example, West Landing, only the people that resided in the West Landing could vote on whether or not to approve that. And those are the only 2 statutes in existence right now in regards to boundaries. So it'd have to be one of those 2. And that would be the only way we could move forward from our understanding and consulting our attorneys, our mutual attorneys. That's the choices we would have if we choose to move forward.
So that first method that Dr. Olson talked about there really is, my understanding is, that's only available to school districts that are petitioning. If, like we had with Landings, when homeowners are petitioning, they have to go through the excision vote process. And only been done, from what our attorneys found, one time, I think, Boise and West Ada or Meridian School District at the time.
Yeah, there was an interesting signature on that. It was mine, and it involved, again, and Jerry and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, a quid pro quo swap between 2 districts that involved unoccupied properties. And that was probably about 12 years ago.
But it seems to me that the former method is the only method that we'd want to use right now. Otherwise, we're doing everything piecemeal again. Isn't that accurate?
Well, it would be my understanding that either one of them, you would just make either one of them you'd make a submission, and ultimately you got to go through a different process, but we would do it all in one fell swoop is the way we would do it, because the Board of Trustees have that authority to make that submission. However, ultimately it comes down to a vote 308. If you use 308, it comes down to a vote of the people residing in the affected areas. So we could, do the whole thing, but all those folks we'd have to set up an election and they'd have to have the opportunity to vote. 308. 307, this disclosure, Don Sultan is a state board member he comes to the Region 1 Superintendent's meeting, and I briefed him on on this situation. And I know that Linda Clark, the board chair, the state board chair, Stan has had conversations with her. So they are aware loosely of what could possibly happen under either front, because they're involved no matter what, either option. The state board would be involved.
They're receptive to the discussion.
It seems like there's a short-term loss to the Coeur d'Alene district of tax property, right? Tax valuation, but a potential long-term gain if all those empty fields are filled in. I guess my question is then about Post Falls. Is there long-term gain there too? I would assume. There's a lot of the development west of Hutter, I assume, right? I just wondered.
Well, there is a section of land that is involved north of Celtice that could potentially someday develop out. And is this thing on? I don't know. Again, unknown, but that could happen for sure. It's just north of Celtice. You know, if you want to see it in your mind, there's a kind of a gravel pit to the north side of Celtice, right there at the corner of Celtice and Hutter. And then on the other side of that is a farmer's field. And of course, that obviously at some point could develop out. We don't, you know, at this point, there's no evidence that the owner wants that to happen. But bottom line is that could happen. But, you know, the river property is what it is. You know, it's, you know, that's one of the reasons the value is what it is, because there's considerable value in river property, and there's some substantial homes on in the river property as well. There's also some other areas, and we spoke about down by Sealy Road, more housing, traditional housing kind of a thing. But I guess there is potential. You know, it's only one section of land versus 4. That would be, you know, the difference probably.
Sure.
Can I ask a question? I apologize if this is the right form. I'm not a procedure here, but when we talk about putting it to vote or impacted persons, as I'm kind of glancing the map that you sent with the blue line that runs north-south on Hutter versus the red line, the current boundary district, when we talk about impacted parties, are we talking about everybody in the Coeur d'Alene School District versus everybody in the Post Falls School District as a quote-unquote impacted party, or is it literally, as you just pointed out, Armstrong's property with from the south of Hanley all the way to the freeway on one side as an impacted party, and then those persons who would reside in the trails, and then the persons that would have that corner from Harvest to Prairie and Hutter to, I assume that's Carrington. Like, would those be the impacted parties, or would it?
We're talking. So, Jerry, let me. Since we are taping this, I'm just going to kind of restate his question, if we can. Looks like you're going to answer it, but I'll restate it. So his question was, who would the impacted voters be? Would that be the entire school districts, or would it be just the people in those
Idaho Code 33308, very specific. Only those people residing in the impacted areas. So we're talking specifically like the Fars land, the Armstrong, all the people in the trails, the people on the river that we're talking about. Those are the only people that get to vote under 33308.
Sure. One thing that's kind of interesting about that statute, and it's why some of this land hasn't come before the school districts previously, is because it's vacant land with no homeowner. So they could petition as the landowner, but if they're going to have an election, there has to be at least one registered voter to vote in an election. We had a neighborhood north of here that was part of the Lakeland School District, and the developer actually, he built out the neighborhood. He put one home in it. His son or a family member moved into that home. They petitioned, and that one person voted for the 40 or 50 lots. Once it was approved, then they started selling the lots in the Coeur d'Alene School District. So they guaranteed basically the vote results. That's essentially what these people would have to do on these vacant parcels. They would have to put a home there to do it if they were petitioning on their own. Because of the way we'd be looking at it with the district, we're lumping vacant land with homes. So it's only the homeowners who are registered to vote that would get to vote on this. Mr. Farr, who spoke earlier about his property, he's got a piece of property off Prairie there. There's no home on it. He would be impacted, but he wouldn't get to vote because he's not registered to vote there. Okay. Other questions? Dave, you got any?
No, excuse me, just, I guess, you know, from the bottom line, it's not about not about the quality of education. I mean, I think that's the beauty of this whole thing is we have two really, really good school districts, both represented here. And for our school district, I think it's more about us getting feedback, you know, and you can always do something that is going to be viewed positively, but if you don't go through the right steps, it can turn into a real negative thing. And I think appreciate the fact that you all came out and gave us some feedback because we need that feedback to make the right decision, and we don't want to make any mistakes in this and have to do something different down the road either. So we appreciate your feedback, and just want to make sure for our board, if you guys have any other questions, because ultimately we're going to have to, you know, our whole goal collectively as a group was to come together and move this forward together. That's the only way it should work. So you guys have any other questions or comments?
Once we draw these lines, that's it. The houses that go in after that, everyone will know which school district they're going to. And it's just a small group that's impacted right now with all of this, correct?
I think to kind of go on that a little bit too, is it would, you know, long-term prevent some of the things that have happened when these subdivisions are being built out as well, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think collectively with Stan and Jerry, and of course Stan's only here a few more months, but that's what they've talked about. I think that would be our expectation. We certainly aren't, we can't commit future boards, right? And you never know. You know, a subdivision, even one of these that's in, could ask to change under the current law. They can always have that right. We can't take that away. But I think what it eliminates is the confusion that we have, right? You know, and we certainly could do nothing. My guess would be if we choose not to do this and that's not right for us, we're just going to see a lot of requests. I don't believe there's anything that prevents the trail subdivision from trying again. And as that area develops further south, you're going to have that. You know, I think we'll just continue to see it, unless the law changes.
I just want to thank everyone who came tonight to speak. It was very helpful to hear from you. And a special thank you to Stan and Jerry and Dave and Casey. This was a tremendously complicated issue, as you've probably now learned. It's not just a matter of drawing lines, but we have to look at the taxing rates and our taxable income. And I want to thank you because I think you came up with, as everyone's pointed out, a real common sense approach. Thank you.
I just want to point out one thing. This current boundary is an anachronism. This was done back when Pearl Harbor was bombed, and it defines the boundaries of area farms. You know, 80 years ago. There's been so much change in 80 years, especially in the last few years. And it's coming down the pike really fast now. And I think if we're going to make a change here, we better get to it. And something that is simple and easily understood by people on both sides, on every side, I think that's the best bet.
Okay. So I think what we'll need to do, and probably we'll get Stan and Jerry together, maybe Dave and I at some point here, but kind of flush out what we've heard tonight and come back to our own boards respectively and figure out which, you know, we've got two paths to go here. One thing that we didn't touch on, there's just, you know, the end result's the same, but there's a little difference in timing on them and how long something's going to take. I think they've talked, if we go the non-public vote route, maybe it could be done within 6 months. I think if you go a vote route, it would take substantially longer, maybe a year or so. You think that's right, Jerry?
I would assume it'd take, the earliest we could have an election is August. And again, a lot of variables. But
Sure.
Yeah, that's too late for me, for sure.
Okay.
So the next procedure is that both boards vote that, at their own respective board meetings, right? As to what do these.
Correct.
So we go 3307 or 3308, right? Or even
Correct.
whether or not we want to go forward on this at all, right?
Go ahead, Jerry.
I guess from our perspective, I think the first decision is, do we want to move forward?
Right.
I think, that would be premature for us to get into a methodology before we're even firmly in a place to land. And Dave,
No,
ladies?
Yeah, no, I think a board vote on moving forward is the first step, and then analyzing the two different routes to take and choosing the best option is the second choice, so.
Well, either way, I think there's, again, the earliest there could be an election is August. I think I'm pretty confident that that is the case. So I don't think the clock's ticking super duper fast, but it would delay it a little bit. But I think if our board does land that we want to move forward with the proposal, then the next step would be, okay, what method and et cetera.
What he said.
Okay.
Sorry. So are you saying, like, we move into the trails and we need to register our kids for school, and so we're still technically in Post Falls, and then there's a vote, like, in October, and then we are in Coeur d'Alene, so then do we switch to, what are, so I mean, what would be the?
So the question is, what would the timing be? It's really going to be depending what the boards choose and which route we choose to go.
Okay, so would we like switch mid-school year to say, hey, now we're in, or do we do a year, finish out the school year in Post Falls after, since we were there for, a month, and then.
Gentlemen?
They're currently in Coeur d'Alene right now, but.
Well, I think it's as simple as if both boards agree that we're moving forward with this proposal, I think it would be prudent for us to start a process of grandfathering in. The testimony here tonight is pretty strong, and there's just not that many voters. That's the other thing. I'm not sure we're represented by the river folks very well, but again, that doesn't. I guess I don't anticipate that it would be problematic, and I can't speak for the Coeur d'Alene School District, but I know I'd recommend to my board that we allow somebody to enroll in our district that, and save that. Because I would say if we both boards land that we want to move forward, I'm pretty confident that this will take place. That's at least my opinion. And again, with the kids always being the number one, we want stability. We want to make sure, I don't think there's much risk that the vote would not be supportive of the move.
And I would add that, and it was mentioned previously, we've had some discussion with the leadership of the State Board of Education. And what they're looking for is what we told them last September. And what we told them last September, and several of you were in that room at Atlas Elementary when we had the state hearing, and that was the real solution in this is between the affected districts, not in annexation hearings and pitting one district against each other. The real solution in this is working together, coming forward with commonsensical boundaries that can be interpreted and understood easily and enforced easily. And that's basically why we move forward. That's basically why we've had these discussions. And it's basically why we hope to be able, and Jerry and I tease each other about this. I was told by the State Board Chair, if Stan and Jerry come to us hand in hand and basically say we have a consensus view here, that they would be willing to work with us to expedite the process.
Okay. Well, again, we'd like to thank you all for being here tonight, and we'll keep you all informed as we move forward. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.